The lawyer's voice was clinical, detached, like he was reading a grocery list instead of dismantling what was left of Rachel's hope. The estate consists of one filing cabinet, circa 1952, located in the deceased's residence. As the sole surviving relative, it passes to you. Everything else has been liquidated to settle debts. Rachel stared at the single sheet of paper across the cluttered desk, her 5-year-old daughter Lily fidgeting in the plastic chair beside her. A filing cabinet. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. That's what Uncle Theodore had left her after 43 years of life. Not the house she'd visited as a child, with its library that smelled like pipe tobacco and old books. Not the car he'd driven with such pride. Not even a photograph or letter. Just a filing cabinet. The residence has been sold, the lawyer continued, adjusting his glasses with the impatience of someone who had more important clients waiting. You have until Friday to remove the cabinet. After that, the new owners will dispose of it. Friday? Rachel's voice cracked. That's 3 days. 3 days, he confirmed, already closing the file. The moving company won't take it, says it's too heavy and not worth their time. You'll need to arrange your own transportation. Rachel wanted to argue, to demand more time, to explain that she was living in a studio apartment with her daughter, that she worked double shifts at the diner just to keep the lights on, that she didn't own a truck or know anyone who did. But the lawyer's expression told her he'd heard every hard luck story before and found them all equally tiresome. Thank you for your time, she managed, gathering Lily's hand and her worn purse. Outside, the October wind cut through her thin jacket. Lily pressed close, her small fingers cold in Rachel's grip. The bus stop was 2 blocks away, and Rachel calculated automatically. $3.50 for both fares, which left $17.23 in her checking account until Friday's paycheck, if it even came. The diner had been threatening cutbacks for weeks. "Mummy, what's a filing cabinet?" Lily asked, as they waited under the bus shelter's questionable protection. "It's a big metal box where people keep papers," Rachel explained, pulling her daughter closer. "Like a dresser, but for important documents." "Is it treasure?" Rachel's heart twisted. At 5, Lily still believed in treasure, in magic, in happy endings. She hadn't yet learned that life mostly consisted of bills you couldn't pay and promises that broke. "No, baby, it's just old papers. Boring grown-up stuff." But that night, after Lily fell asleep in the bed they shared, Rachel lay awake thinking about Uncle Theodore. He'd been her father's older brother, brilliant and eccentric, a university professor who'd never married, never had children. He'd taught philosophy and collected antiques, filling his Victorian house with beautiful, useless things. Rachel had loved him fiercely as a child. He'd let her read his books, taught her chess, listened to her dreams of becoming a writer like she mattered. Then her parents died when she was 16, a car accident on black ice, and everything splintered. She'd gone to live with her aunt in Cleveland, finished high school, made stupid choices with stupid men. Uncle Theodore had sent cards on birthdays, brief notes at Christmas, but the distance grew until it felt permanent. She'd learned of his death from a newspaper obituary 3 weeks ago. Heart attack, alone in his study, probably surrounded by the books he'd loved more than people. The funeral had been small, a handful of colleagues, fewer friends. Rachel had stood in the back with Lily, too ashamed of her circumstances to approach the professors who remembered when she'd been bright with potential. Now his entire legacy to her was a filing cabinet she didn't want and couldn't move. The next morning, Rachel called in favors. Her neighbor, Tom, had a pickup truck, but his back was out. Her co-worker, Shanice, offered to help but couldn't lift anything heavy doctor's orders after her surgery. The moving companies she called quoted prices between $200 and $400, laughing when she explained it was just one piece of furniture. "Lady, we don't do single items," one dispatcher said. "And a 1,952 filing cabinet. Those things weigh like 300 pounds. You'd be better off leaving it." Rachel hung up and stared at the notice the lawyer had given her. The address was across town, in the neighborhood where elegant old houses sat behind iron gates and ancient trees. She hadn't been there in 15 years, but she remembered the route like yesterday. That afternoon, she took Lily out of daycare early, saving the $12 half-day fee, and they rode 3 buses to Uncle Theodore's street. The house looked smaller than memory painted it, the paint more faded, the garden more overgrown, a sold sign tilted in the front yard, and Rachel felt a pang of loss for something that had never really been hers. The key the lawyer had provided stuck in the lock, then turned with a grinding protest. The door swung open on air that tasted of dust and abandonment. Someone had already cleaned out most of the furniture. Rectangular shadows on the wallpaper marked where paintings had hung. The built-in bookshelves stood empty, stripped of the volumes that had made them meaningful. "It's like a ghost house," Lily whispered, pressing against Rachel's leg. Rachel's throat tightened. It was exactly like a ghost house, the ghost of her childhood, of who she might have become if her parents hadn't died, if she hadn't gotten pregnant at 22 by a man who disappeared the moment she told him, if she'd made literally any better choice along the way. The filing cabinet sat in what had been Uncle Theodore's study. 4 drawers, tall, industrial gray, covered in decades of scratches and dings. It looked exactly as worthless as the lawyer had implied. Rachel tried the top drawer locked, the second drawer locked, third and fourth, the same. She searched the room for keys, opening the few remaining desk drawers, checking the windowsills and bookshelves. Nothing. Of course, Theodore hadn't left them in an obvious place. He'd probably died with them in his pocket, buried in whatever thrift store suit the funeral home had dressed him in. "We can't even open it," Rachel said to the empty room. "What's the point? Maybe there's treasure inside," Lily said, running her small hand along the cabinet's scarred surface. "Like in the stories. Real life doesn't work like that, baby." But even as she said it, Rachel remembered Uncle Theodore's voice. "The most valuable things are often the ones people overlook, Rachel. The world mistakes quiet for worthless. Don't make that error." She'd been 8 or 9, upset because the popular girls at school had mocked her for reading during recess. Theodore had taken her to his study, shown her his collection of first editions, explained how most people walked past books worth thousands in used bookstores because they only saw old paper. "Learn to see what others miss," he'd said. "That's where life's real treasures hide." Rachel shook off the memory. Treasures. She was 33 years old, living in a 400 square foot studio with her daughter, working 60-hour weeks for $11 an hour plus tips. The only treasure she needed was enough money to keep the lights on. She measured the filing cabinet with her eyes and the tape measure she'd brought. 4 feet tall, maybe 18 inches deep, perhaps 2 feet wide, heavy as hell. No way she could move it alone, and she had no one to help. Friday came faster than possible. Rachel worked the breakfast shift, pocketed $43 in tips, and caught the bus back to Uncle Theodore's house with a growing sense of defeat. The new owners had left a note on the door. "If not removed by 5 p.m. today, all remaining items will be disposed of." It was 3:17 p.m. Rachel stood in the study, staring at the filing cabinet like it might offer solutions. She'd tried everything, called every moving company in the phone book, posted on neighborhood forums offering her next 3 paychecks to anyone with a truck, even considered just leaving it, walking away, letting the new owners deal with it. But something stopped her. Maybe it was pride. This was all she had left of family, of history. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Maybe it was Lily's insistence that there might be treasure inside, or maybe it was just that Rachel was so tired of losing things, of watching pieces of her life get stripped away until nothing remained but the endless grind of survival. She tried the drawers again, yanking hard in frustration. The bottom drawer shifted slightly, the lock mechanism weaker than the others. Rachel pulled harder, putting her weight into it. Metal groaned. Something inside the drawer creaked. Then, with a sharp crack, the lock broke. The drawer slid open. Inside were files, dozens of them, arranged with meticulous precision. Rachel pulled out the first folder, hands trembling slightly. The tab read, Personal Correspondence, 1,975 to 1,980. She opened it to find letters in Theodore's careful handwriting, addressed to colleagues, friends, family. Nothing remarkable. She set it aside and reached for another folder. Investment records, 1,982 to 1,990. This one held stock certificates, purchase receipts, transaction records. Rachel skimmed them without comprehension. Uncle Theodore had taught philosophy, not business. Why would he have investment records? The third folder made her pause. Acquisitions, authentication, pending. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them. Paintings, sculptures, manuscripts. Each photo paper clipped to documents covered in dense text. Provenance reports, appraisal estimates, correspondence with auction houses and museums. Rachel's pulse quickened. She recognized some of the artwork from Uncle Theodore's house pieces she'd seen hanging on walls or displayed on shelves during childhood visits. But according to these documents, they weren't reproductions or decorative prints. They were originals. She found a photo of the small landscape that used to hang in the dining room. Beneath it, an appraisal from 1,987 estimated its value at $125,000 for a painting that had hung unprotected above a radiator. Another photo showed a sculpture she remembered from the mantelpiece. The attached document declared it authentic 16th century bronze, valued at $340,000. Rachel's hands started shaking. She pulled out more folders, spreading them across the dusty floor. Estate planning documents, trust arrangements, museum donation agreements. The pieces started connecting in her mind like a puzzle she'd been staring at too long. Uncle Theodore hadn't been an eccentric professor who collected pretty things. He'd been a serious art collector who disguised his collection as ordinary decor. And according to these documents, he'd liquidated everything in the 2 years before his death. But why? And where had the money gone? Rachel checked her phone. 4:23 p.m., 37 minutes until the deadline. She needed to move the cabinet, needed to get these files somewhere safe, needed to understand what she'd found. She tried the second drawer. Still locked. The third drawer locked. She examined the broken bottom drawer's lock mechanism, trying to understand how to replicate the break on the others without destroying them. Then she noticed something. The bottom of the broken drawer sat slightly higher than it should, creating a small gap. Rachel pressed on it experimentally, and it shifted. False bottom. She pried at the edges with her fingers, then her keys, finally leveraging it up with a ruler she found in the desk. The false bottom lifted away, revealing a shallow compartment underneath. Inside lay a single envelope, yellowed with age, sealed with red wax. Rachel's breath caught. The envelope bore her name in Theodore's handwriting. For Rachel, open only when you're ready to see. Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal and pulled out a letter. My dear Rachel, if you're reading this, I have passed, and you found the cabinet I left you. I imagine you're frustrated. A filing cabinet is a terrible inheritance for someone struggling as I know you are. Forgive an old man's sense of drama. The truth is more complex than it appears. I've spent 40 years building a collection of significant artwork, acquiring pieces that museums overlooked and dealers undervalued. Not for profit, but for preservation. The world is too quick to destroy what it doesn't immediately value. 2 years ago, I received my diagnosis. Terminal, inoperable. I had perhaps 3 years, the doctors said. In the end, I had 27 months. I sold the collection, piece by piece, through private sales and auction houses. Not because I needed the money, but because I needed to transform it into something more flexible, more useful, more secret. Rachel, I know you think I abandoned you after your parents died. I didn't. I was protecting you from a complicated legal situation involving your aunt's claim on your parents' estate. By the time it was resolved, you'd built a life, a hard life. But yours and I feared my interference would only complicate things. I followed your journey from a distance. I know about Lily. I know about your struggles. I know you work yourself to exhaustion, trying to provide for your daughter the way your parents would have wanted. You're reading this because you broke into the bottom drawer, which means you're desperate enough to fight for even a worthless filing cabinet. That desperation, that refusal to surrender, that's why I chose you. The other 3 drawers each require a specific key. The keys are hidden throughout this study, in places that will mean something only to someone who knew this room, who knew me. Find them, and you'll find what I've left you. But Rachel, and this is crucial, you must tell no one about this until you've opened all the drawers and understand the full scope. The money I've converted from the collection will attract attention, and not all of it kind. Protect yourself. Protect Lily. Move carefully. You always asked the right questions as a child. You saw what others missed. I'm trusting you to do so again. With more love than I knew how to show, Uncle Theodore. Rachel read the letter 3 times, her mind reeling. Keys, hidden in the study. 3 locked drawers. Money converted from an art collection. She checked her phone. 4:41 p.m. 19 minutes. The study looked barren after the estate sale, but Rachel forced herself to think like the child who'd spent hours here. Where would Theodore hide something meant only for her? The bookshelves stood empty, but she ran her hands along them anyway, feeling for hollows or loose boards. Nothing. The desk had been taken, the rug removed, even the curtains were gone. Then she remembered. The chess set. Uncle Theodore had taught her to play on a beautiful wooden board with hand-carved pieces. They'd spent countless afternoons hunched over that board, Theodore patiently explaining strategy, while Rachel learned to think 3 moves ahead. She scanned the room. The chess set was gone, of course, sold with everything else. But the small side table where they'd played that remained, too worthless for the estate sale to bother with. Rachel knelt beside it, examining the legs, the surface, the joints. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then she noticed the table's center drawer stuck slightly, like something blocked it. She pulled harder. The drawer opened 2 inches and stopped. Rachel reached inside, her fingers finding an obstruction, something taped to the drawer's underside. A small brass key. Her heart hammering, Rachel tried it in the second drawer of the filing cabinet. The lock turned smoothly, as if it had been waiting 60 years for this exact moment. The drawer slid open. Inside were more files, but also something else. Stacks of documents in protective sleeves, each one bearing official seals and signatures. Rachel pulled out the first stack. Certificate of deposit, First National Bank, $8,400,000. She stared at the number until it stopped looking like digits and started looking like a joke. $8,400,000. In a CD. In her uncle's name. The next document. Certificate of Deposit Continental Trust, $11,200,000. Another. Money Market, Account Heritage Financial, $6,800,000. Rachel's hands went numb. She dropped the papers, watched them scatter across the floor like leaves. $26 million, just in the second drawer. And there were 2 more locked drawers. She checked her phone with shaking hands. 4:53 p.m. 7 minutes until the deadline. The new owners would be here soon. If they found her now, if they saw what she'd discovered. Rachel shoved the documents back into the drawer, closed it, locked it. She needed time to think, to plan, to understand. But first, she needed to save the cabinet. She ran to the front door, locked it from inside, then dragged the hall table in front of it. Not much of a barricade, but it might buy her minutes. Then she returned to the study, mind racing. 2 more keys. 2 more drawers. Think like Uncle Theodore. Think like someone who loved puzzles and patterns, who believed the most valuable things were the ones people overlooked. The window seat. It had been her favorite spot as a child, a cushioned nook where she'd curl up with books while autumn rain pattered against the glass. The window seat remained because it was built into the room, unsellable, fixed in place. Rachel knelt beside it, running her hands along the wooden paneling. Most of it was solid, but one section near the floor felt different. She pressed, and it clicked inward, revealing a small hollow space. Inside, another brass key. The third drawer opened to reveal something different from financial documents. This drawer held letters, hundreds of them, organized chronologically, spanning decades. Rachel pulled out a bundle from the top. They were letters to her. Letters Uncle Theodore had written but never sent. Birthday letters, Christmas letters, letters marking milestones he'd somehow known about. Her high school graduation, Lily's birth, every hard moment he'd watched from a distance. Dear Rachel, happy 18th birthday. I wanted to call, but your aunt made it clear my contact wasn't welcome. I hope you're well. I hope you're happy. I hope you know you're loved. Dear Rachel, I heard about Lily's arrival. Congratulations on becoming a mother. I remember when you were born, your father called me at 3 a.m., so excited he could barely speak. You'll be an excellent parent. You have your mother's strength. Dear Rachel, I saw you at the grocery store last month. You looked exhausted. I wanted to offer help, but I know you'd refuse out of pride. So instead, I'm planning. When I'm gone, you'll have what you need. Please be patient with an old man's machinations. Rachel's vision blurred with tears. All these years, thinking she was forgotten, abandoned, alone, and he'd been watching, writing, planning. At the bottom of the letters lay one more envelope, thicker than the others. Inside, she found a key and a note. The 4th drawer holds everything else, the culmination of my life's work converted to something that can change yours. But first, you must find the final key. I've left it in the place where I taught you the most important lesson of your life. Remember the day you cried because the other children called you poor. Remember what I showed you. Remember what I said about seeing value where others see worthlessness. The lesson wasn't about books, Rachel. It was about you. Rachel's mind raced back to that day. She'd been 8, devastated by classmates' cruelty. Uncle Theodore had brought her to his study, shown her his first editions, explained how most people walked past treasures because they looked ordinary. Then he'd done something else. He'd opened his desk drawer and pulled out the photograph. It had been a picture of Rachel's mother as a child, a portrait Uncle Theodore had commissioned. He'd shown Rachel how similar they looked, how her mother had been quiet and overlooked too, but had become someone remarkable. You're the treasure, Rachel, he'd said. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. The desk was gone, sold in the estate sale. But Rachel remembered now the photograph had been in a frame. A small silver frame, Theodore kept in his desk's top drawer. She'd seen it during the estate sale liquidation, sitting in a box of items deemed too worthless to price individually. The box had been marked, "Free, take what you want." The box that had been moved to the garage. Rachel ran down the hall, through the kitchen, to the side door leading to the garage. The space was dark and musty, filled with shadows and the ghosts of Uncle Theodore's forgotten things. She found the box in the corner, mostly empty now. A few cracked picture frames, some tarnished silverware, a broken clock, and there the silver frame. Rachel grabbed it, turned it over, pried open the backing. The photograph of her mother slid out, and with it, taped to the back, the final brass key. She was back in the study, key trembling in her hand, when she heard the front door rattle. Someone was trying to get in. "Hello?" A man's voice, irritated. "The house is sold. If someone's in there, you're trespassing." Rachel's pulse spiked. She inserted the final key into the fourth drawer, turned it, held her breath. The drawer opened. Inside weren't documents or letters. Inside were more keys, different kinds this time. Safety, deposit box keys, each labeled with a bank name and box number, and beneath them, a leather-bound ledger. Rachel opened the ledger to the first page. Final accounting of the Theodore Whitmore collection, followed by pages of entries. Rembrandt sketch. Sold privately $12. 4 M. Italian Renaissance sculpture. Auction $8. 2 M. Ming Dynasty vase. Private sale $15. 7 M. Van Gogh study. Museum acquisition $23. 1 M. On and on, 40 years of acquisitions and sales, each one meticulously documented. At the bottom of the final page, a total, complete collection value at sale, $312,847,000. The front door crashed open. The table Rachel had dragged wasn't enough. She heard footsteps in the hall. Multiple people. She grabbed the ledger, shoved all 4 drawers closed, locked 3 of them, pocketed the keys. She could hear voices getting closer, said they'd clear everything out. If someone broke in, Rachel stepped into the hallway, trying to look casual despite her racing heart. A middle-aged couple stood there, well-dressed, annoyed. "The new owners, I'm so sorry," Rachel said quickly. "I'm Theodore Whitmore's niece. The lawyer said I had until 5 to remove one piece of furniture, and I lost track of time. I'll be out of your way in just a moment." The woman's expression softened slightly. "Oh, yes," the lawyer mentioned. "Something about a filing cabinet." "That's right. I've arranged for someone to pick it up." The lie came smoothly, desperately. The man checked his watch. "It's 5:04. You're past deadline. I know, and I apologize. Just give me 10 minutes. And the contract was very clear," the man interrupted. 5 p.m., or the items become ours to dispose of. We're within our rights to keep it, or trash it. Rachel's chest tightened. "Please. It's all I have left of my family." The woman touched her husband's arm. "Robert, it's just a filing cabinet. Let her take it. It's about principle, Helen. We bought this house to flip. Every hour we delay costs money. If we make exceptions, it's a filing cabinet," Helen repeated, more firmly. "Not a grand piano. Let the girl take her uncle's papers." Robert's jaw worked, but he nodded grudgingly. "Fine. But it's gone by tonight. We start demolition tomorrow morning." Rachel nearly sagged with relief. "Yes. Absolutely. Thank you so much." She pulled out her phone with trembling hands and called the one person she knew with a truck, Tom, from her apartment building, the neighbor with the bad back who'd refused before. "Tom, I know you said you couldn't help, but I'm desperate. I'll pay you everything I have. Please." There was a long pause. How much is everything you have? Rachel thought of the tip money in her pocket, the meager balance in her checking account. $60? Another pause. Then, I'll do it for the story. You can explain why a filing cabinet is worth this much panic. An hour later, Tom's truck pulled up to Uncle Theodore's house. Rachel had spent the time making small talk with Helen, while Robert paced and checked his watch every 3 minutes. When Tom climbed out of the truck, moving carefully because of his back, Rachel could have cried with relief. That's it. Tom stared at the filing cabinet. Jesus! You weren't kidding about it being heavy. It took both of them, plus Helen. Robert refused to help on principle, to wrestle the cabinet onto a furniture dolly and out to the truck. The thing weighed at least 300 pounds, maybe more. By the time they secured it in the truck bed, Rachel's arms trembled and sweat soaked through her shirt, despite the October chill. You want to tell me what's so important about this thing? Tom asked, as they drove away. Rachel looked back at Uncle Theodore's house, growing smaller in the side mirror. Family history, she said. Just family history. Tom's studio apartment barely fit the filing cabinet. They had to move the couch, the coffee table, and stack boxes to create space. Lily watched the whole process with wide eyes, asking questions Rachel couldn't yet answer. After Tom left declining payment, but accepting Rachel's promise of dinner once she had time to breathe, Rachel stood alone in the dimly lit studio, staring at the cabinet. $312 million. The number felt impossible. Fake. A mistake. But the documents in the second drawer were real. The keys in her pocket were real. The safety deposit box numbers in the ledger were real. Uncle Theodore had spent 40 years building a secret art collection, then liquidated it all and converted it into money. Money now sitting in accounts and safety deposit boxes with her name on them. She opened the ledger again, this time reading more carefully. Every entry was documented with receipts, provenance papers, authentication certificates. Uncle Theodore hadn't just collected art, he'd collected proof. Near the back of the ledger, she found a section titled Legal Structure and Access. It detailed a trust Theodore had established 5 years before his death. The trust owned all the accounts, all the safety deposit boxes, and the sole beneficiary was Rachel. But there was a catch. The trust terms specified that funds couldn't be accessed until either Rachel's 35th birthday or 1 year after Theodore's death, whichever came first. Rachel did the math. Theodore had died 3 weeks ago, which meant she had 11 more months to wait. 11 months of keeping this secret. 11 months of struggling at the diner. 11 months of watching every penny while sitting on more money than she could spend in 10 lifetimes. She wanted to scream. She wanted to laugh. She wanted to cry. Instead, she made macaroni and cheese for Lily and pretended everything was normal. That night, after Lily fell asleep, Rachel pulled out the second drawer again and went through every document. She found account numbers, access codes, contact information for the law firm managing the trust. She found letters from auction houses confirming sales. She found thank you notes from museums that had acquired pieces from Theodore's collection. She found a pattern too. Theodore had been careful, meticulous, even. He'd never sold more than 2 or 3 pieces a year. He'd used different auction houses, different dealers, different banks for the resulting funds. He'd spread everything out so no one would notice the pattern, so no one would connect the dots and realize a philosophy professor had quietly amassed one of the most significant private art collections in the country. Why? Rachel kept returning to that question. Why hide it? Why convert it to cash? Why structure it so she couldn't access it immediately? The answer came in another letter she found, tucked between account statements. Rachel, I know waiting will be difficult. I'm sorry for that. But I need you to understand what you're inheriting before you claim it. Sudden wealth destroys more lives than it saves. I've seen it happen. Colleagues who won the lottery, students who inherited too young, friends who received windfalls they weren't prepared to manage. The waiting period serves two purposes. First, it gives you time to prepare, to learn, to understand what you're inheriting isn't just money, but responsibility. Second, it protects you. By the time you can access the funds, they'll have been held long enough that no one can claim I was of unsound mind when I established the trust. No distant relative can contest it. No creditor can touch it. The year will be hard. I know that. But you've survived hard years before. You'll survive this one. And when it's over, you'll be ready. Rachel set down the letter and looked around her tiny studio. The water-stained ceiling, the radiator that clanked all night, the window that wouldn't quite close, letting in cold air and street noise. 11 more months of this. But 11 months wasn't forever. She'd survived worse, with less hope. The next morning, Rachel returned to work at the diner. Shanice noticed something different immediately. "Girl, you look like you found Jesus and lost him again in the same day. What happened?" Rachel poured coffee for a regular customer and forced a smile. "Just family stuff. My uncle died and left me some papers to sort through. That all?" "You look like you won the lottery." The irony made Rachel's hands shake slightly. "Not quite. Just closure, I guess, knowing he thought about me at the end." She couldn't tell anyone. Uncle Theodore's letter had been clear about that. The trust documents emphasized it too. Discretion was paramount. Once word got out about the money, everything would change. People would treat her differently, want things from her, question her every decision. For now, she was still just Rachel. Still the single mom who worked double shifts and counted pennies. Still invisible in the way poor people always were. Except she knew what was coming. The weeks crawled by. Rachel worked her shifts, picked up Lily from daycare, made dollar store dinners, and pretended her life hadn't fundamentally altered. At night, after Lily slept, she studied. She borrowed books from the library about financial management, trust funds, investment strategies. She educated herself on tax law, on estate planning, on philanthropy. She made lists of what she wanted to do with the money, not fantasy lists of yachts and mansions, but practical plans. Pay off medical debt, buy a reliable car, find a decent apartment with separate bedrooms, start a college fund for Lily, help other single mothers who were struggling the way she had. The filing cabinet sat in the corner of their studio like a secret too big to hold. Sometimes Rachel would wake in the night and stare at it, convinced she'd imagined everything. Then she'd pull out a drawer, confirm the documents were real, and try to process the surreal reality of her situation. At Thanksgiving, Lily asked why they couldn't afford turkey. "We'll have chicken instead," Rachel said, hating the lie. "It's just the two of us. A whole turkey would go to waste. Maya's family has turkey and pie, and her grandparents visit. Well, we're different. Because we're poor?" The word stabbed. Rachel pulled Lily close, breathing in her daughter's baby shampoo scent. "Being poor isn't who we are. It's just where we are right now. It won't always be this way. Promise?" Rachel thought of the filing cabinet, of $312 million waiting in accounts and safety deposit boxes, of Theodore's careful planning, his love expressed through Byzantine financial structures and hidden keys. "I promise, baby. Things are going to get better. Soon." December brought freezing temperatures and a broken radiator the landlord refused to fix. Rachel and Lily slept in layers, under every blanket they owned. The filing cabinet loomed in the corner, containing more money than their building's heat bill for a century, while they shivered through single-digit nights. Rachel called the trust lawyers twice, desperate, asking if there was any way to access emergency funds. Both times, the answer was the same. Trust terms were absolute. No early disbursement, no exceptions. "I'm literally freezing," she told the second lawyer. A woman named Patricia, who at least sounded sympathetic. I understand. But if we break the trust terms now, the entire structure becomes vulnerable to legal challenges. Your uncle designed this specifically to protect you. Hold on for 6 more months. 6 more months. Rachel hung up and looked at Lily, who was doing homework in mittens because her fingers got too cold without them. 6 more months of this was unacceptable. But what choice did she have? She bought a space heater, $47, at the hardware store, money that should have gone to groceries. They ate ramen and rice for 2 weeks to balance the budget. The space heater kept one small area warm enough to survive. Rachel's co-workers started a collection when Shanice noticed Lily's mittens at the homework table situation. They raised $143, presented it to Rachel in a card covered with signatures. For heat, Shanice said. We've all been there. Rachel accepted with tears she couldn't quite hide, thinking about how unnecessary this charity would be in 6 months, how she'd never forget who helped when she had nothing. January brought the worst. The diner cut hours. Rachel's income dropped from barely enough to actively insufficient. She fell behind on rent, first time in 3 years. The landlord left increasingly threatening notes, and Rachel saw eviction paperwork in their future. She spent one desperate afternoon at the trust office, begging. 3 lawyers, including Patricia, who'd been kind on the phone, explained in excruciating detail why they couldn't help. The trust terms exist to protect you, Patricia repeated. If we make exceptions now, every creditor, every family member, every person with a claim could argue the trust is flexible. Your uncle was very specific about this. My uncle is dead, Rachel said flatly. And I'm about to be homeless. How is this protecting me? It's protecting your future. I know that's not helpful now. You're right. It's not. Rachel walked out, fury and desperation warring in her chest. She passed homeless people huddled in doorways and felt the distance between her and them shrinking daily. One more bad month. One more unexpected expense. That's all it would take. Back in the studio, she stared at the filing cabinet with something close to hatred. Theodore's final lesson, surviving the wait, proved she was worthy. Some test, some love. But even in her anger, she couldn't bring herself to reveal the truth. Going public wouldn't speed up the trust disbursement. It would only complicate everything, attract attention, maybe even endanger what Theodore had built. So, she stayed silent and waited and survived. February arrived with an eviction notice. 30 days to vacate the premises. Rachel stood in the landlord's office, notice in hand, Lily at her side, and felt the ground dropping out. Please, she said, pride abandoned. I just need another month. I'm getting money from a relative's estate. It's tied up in legal stuff, but it's coming. I can pay everything I owe. The landlord, a man named George, who'd been tolerant until tolerance stopped being profitable, shook his head. I've heard every story, Rachel. You're 3 months behind. I have people on a waiting list who can pay. This is business. I have a 5-year-old daughter. I have a mortgage. I'm sorry. And he probably was. In the abstract way, landlords regret evicting tenants, but do it anyway, because cash flow matters more than compassion. That night, Rachel sat on the floor beside the filing cabinet and cried. Lily was at a friend's house for a playdate. Rachel had exactly 2 hours before pickup, 2 hours to fall apart and rebuild before she had to be mom again. The unfairness of it choked her. She was sitting on more money than most people saw in lifetimes, and she couldn't access a single dollar of it. Theodore's protection felt like punishment. His love felt like torture. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Miss Monroe? A man's voice, professional. This is David Keller from Keller and Associates. I represent Theodore Whitmore's estate. I understand you're experiencing financial hardship. Rachel's guard went up immediately. How do you know that? The trust terms include provisions for monitoring the beneficiary's well-being. It's come to our attention that you're facing eviction. The trust lawyers already told me. I'm not calling about early disbursement, David interrupted. I'm calling about a separate provision your uncle established. May I ask, are you currently employed? Yes. I work at a diner. They cut my hours. What's your monthly rent? $675. Why? Your uncle established a discretionary fund separate from the main trust. It's designed to cover basic living expenses for the beneficiary during the waiting period, rent, utilities, essential needs. Nothing extravagant, but enough to prevent homelessness. Would you be interested in accessing those funds? Rachel's breath stopped. Yes. Obviously, yes. Good. I'll need to verify some information. But assuming everything checks out, we can have your rent arrears paid within 48 hours and establish a monthly disbursement to cover ongoing expenses. It felt too good to be true. What's the catch? No catch. Your uncle was thorough. He understood the waiting period would be difficult and took steps to ensure it wasn't impossible. Report. After the call ended, Rachel stayed on the floor, staring at nothing. Theodore hadn't abandoned her to suffer. He'd built in safeguards. Of course he had. He'd always thought 3 moves ahead. 2 days later, her landlord called. Confused. Someone paid your back rent plus next 3 months. Did you? I didn't know you had family who could. Uncle's estate, Rachel said, relief making her giddy. Took a while to process. The discretionary fund changed everything while changing nothing. Rachel still worked at the diner. The fund covered basics, not luxuries. She still lived in the tiny studio, still rode buses and counted pennies. But the crushing weight of immediate crisis lifted. She could breathe. Lily got new winter boots. They ate vegetables again. Rachel replaced her broken phone and finally fixed the car that had been dead in the parking lot for 8 months. Small things, essential things, things that shouldn't feel like miracles, but did. March brought spring, and something else. Attention. It started subtly. A woman in an expensive suit appeared at the diner, asking questions about Rachel, where she lived, whether she'd come into money recently, what she did with her time. Shanice warned Rachel. Someone's looking into you, asking weird questions. You in some kind of trouble? No, Rachel said, but fear coiled in her stomach. That night, she found a note tucked under her apartment door. We know about the money. We should talk. No signature, no contact information, just those 8 words. Rachel called David Keller, hands shaking. Someone's asking about me. Someone knows about the trust. Likely reporters or attorneys fishing for information, David said calmly. Your uncle's estate had to file certain public disclosures. Anyone looking carefully could connect dots. Don't engage. Don't confirm anything. Let them speculate. But the attention escalated. A man approached her outside Lily's school, wanting to discuss business opportunities. A lawyer sent letters about representing her interests for a mere 30% fee. Someone called the diner, asking if they knew Rachel had expectations of significant inheritance. The vultures were circling. Rachel moved through April in a fog of paranoia. She varied her routes, stopped talking about her life, became even more invisible than poverty had already made her. The filing cabinet stayed in her apartment, but she moved it into the closet, covered it with blankets, tried to pretend it didn't exist. Lily noticed. Mummy, why are you scared all the time? I'm not scared, baby. Just careful. It's the same thing. May arrived with a phone call that changed everything. Miss Monroe, this is Patricia from the trust office. There's been a development. A man claiming to be Theodore Whitmore's son has filed a legal challenge to the trust. Rachel's world tilted. Theodore didn't have children. He claims otherwise. Says Theodore fathered him 40 years ago with a woman in California, and the trust should be invalidated because it excludes a biological heir. Is he telling the truth? We're investigating. But in the meantime, the challenge puts the trust in legal limbo. Distribution is frozen until the claim is resolved. Rachel closed her eyes. How long? Could be months. Could be longer, if it goes to trial. After hanging up, Rachel sat very still. Then she pulled the filing cabinet from the closet and opened the first drawer, the one with Uncle Theodore's letters. She found what she needed near the bottom. A letter dated 3 years before his death. Rachel, if someone challenges this trust claiming to be my child, know this. I never fathered children. I was, in fact, unable to do so after an illness in my 20s. Any claim otherwise is fraudulent, and I've left documentation proving it with my physicians. The wolves will come. They always do when there's money to be had. Stand firm. The truth will prevail. You deserve this inheritance, not because of blood, but because you're the only person who ever truly saw me as more than my possessions. Rachel called Patricia back. Check Theodore's medical records from 1967. There will be documentation about his infertility. 2 weeks later, the challenge collapsed. The claimant disappeared when threatened with fraud charges. The trust unfroze, and Rachel had 4 weeks until the 1-year anniversary of Theodore's death. 4 weeks until $312 million became accessible. The final month felt longer than the previous 11 combined. Rachel worked her shifts, maintained her routines, and tried not to think about how profoundly her life was about to change. She made lists, practical lists: reliable car, 2-bedroom apartment, Lily's school expenses, emergency fund, dream lists, college for Lily, at any school she wanted, her own education finally completed, travel, security, breathing room, philanthropic lists, single mothers support fund, arts, education programs, scholarships for kids, like Lily, like Rachel herself had been. She researched financial advisors, read about sudden wealth syndrome, learned about trusts and investments and tax strategies. She was as prepared as someone could be for money that would fundamentally alter reality. The night before the trust unlocked, Rachel couldn't sleep. She stood by the window of their studio, watching the city lights, Lily breathing softly in the bed behind her. Tomorrow, everything changed. Tomorrow, she'd schedule meetings with the trust lawyers, the financial advisors, the tax attorneys. Tomorrow, she'd begin the process of actually accessing the money Theodore had left her. Tomorrow, she'd stop being invisible. But tonight, she was still just Rachel. Still the woman who'd scraped and struggled and survived. Still the mother who'd made macaroni from boxes and pretended it was an adventure. She thought about Uncle Theodore, his careful planning, his hidden collection, his 40 years of quietly accumulating beauty in a world that valued flash over substance. She thought about the filing cabinet everyone said was worthless, about keys hidden in childhood memories, about locked drawers containing impossible amounts of money. She thought about seeing value where others saw nothing. "You taught me that," she whispered to Theodore's memory. "Not just about art, about myself." The next morning dawned clear and bright. Rachel dressed carefully, her best clothes, which still weren't much. She dropped Lily at school, with no explanation for why today was different, why her hands shook slightly as she signed the attendance sheet. The trust office occupied the 14th floor of a downtown building with marble lobbies and fountains. Rachel had been here once before, back in February, begging for early disbursement. Then, she'd felt small and desperate. Now, she walked through the doors as an equal. Patricia met her in the conference room, along with David Keller and 2 other attorneys, whose names Rachel immediately forgot. "Miss Monroe," Patricia said warmly, Welcome. As of 9:17 this morning, the trust terms have been satisfied. The 1-year waiting period has elapsed. We're prepared to transfer full ownership and control of all assets to you. David slid papers across the table. This is the complete accounting. All accounts, all safety deposit boxes, all holdings. Current valuation is slightly higher than original due to interest accrual $314.2 million. The number still felt impossible. Rachel stared at the documents, at the proof that her life had fundamentally transformed. What happens now? She asked. Patricia smiled. Whatever you want. You're the sole owner of one of the largest private fortunes in the state. You can do literally anything. Rachel thought about that word, anything. She could buy a house, 10 houses. She could stop working. She could travel the world. She could do nothing for the rest of her life if she wanted. Or she could do what Theodore had done, live quietly, use resources carefully, build something that mattered beyond herself. I want to set up foundations, Rachel said. One for single mothers, one for arts education, one for kids aging out of foster care. I want to endow scholarships at the university where Theodore taught. I want to create something that outlasts me. The attorneys exchanged glances. Patricia nodded slowly. We can facilitate all of that. But Miss Monroe, Rachel, you understand that giving away significant portions means less for you, less for Lily. I understand. But there's more here than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. And I kept thinking, all those months, I was waiting, what would Theodore want? He spent 40 years collecting art, not to own it, but to preserve it. He liquidated everything not to hoard wealth, but to transform it into something flexible, something useful. He didn't give me money to make me rich. He gave me resources to make a difference. David smiled, first genuine expression she'd seen from him. Your uncle would be proud. They spent 6 hours going through details. Account transfers, tax implications, foundation structures. By the time Rachel left the office, her head spun with information and possibility. She picked up Lily from aftercare, this little girl who'd survived poverty with grace and humor, who'd never complained about hand-me-down clothes or boxed macaroni, who deserved everything the world could offer. How was your day? Lily asked as they walked to the bus stop. Rachel almost laughed. How was her day? She'd inherited $314 million. She'd become one of the wealthiest women in the state. She'd set in motion plans to help thousands of people. It was good, baby. Really good. Can we get pizza for dinner? The fancy kind with vegetables. Rachel thought about the black car waiting at the curb the driver David had insisted on hiring, at least until she adjusted to her new circumstances. She thought about the accounts she could now access, the credit cards with functionally unlimited limits, the life she could afford. Yeah, she said, pulling Lily close. We can get the fancy pizza. And you know what? We don't have to take the bus. She led Lily to the black car. The driver opened the door with a professional smile. Lily's eyes went wide. Whose car is this? Ours, Rachel said. For now, anyway. Come on. As they drove toward the pizza place, the nice one they'd always passed but never entered, Lily pressed her face to the window, watching the familiar streets from this new, luxurious vantage point. Mom? Did something happen? Rachel met her daughter's eyes in the reflection. Yeah, baby. Uncle Theodore, the one I told you about? He left us something. Something that's going to change our lives. Is it magic? Rachel thought about filing cabinets everyone wanted to discard, about keys hidden in childhood memories, about seeing value where others saw nothing, about transformation and possibility and second chances. Yeah, she said softly. I think maybe it is. That night, in their studio apartment for the last time, Rachel had already decided they'd move within the month. She opened the filing cabinet one final time. She pulled out Theodore's letters, his ledgers, his careful documentation of 40 years of secret collecting. At the very bottom of the fourth drawer, she found one last envelope, a letter in Theodore's handwriting, dated the week before his death. Rachel, if you're reading this, you've made it through. You've survived the waiting, resisted the temptation to reveal everything prematurely, and proven yourself exactly who I always believed. You are someone who understands that true value lies not in possession, but in purpose. The money is yours now, all of it. Do with it what serves you and Lily. But remember what I taught you as a child. The most valuable things are often the ones people overlook. You were overlooked your whole life. By your aunt, by employers, by a system designed to keep people like you small. But you were never worthless, never nothing. You were always treasure. Now you have the resources to prove it not to others, but to yourself. Build something beautiful. Live fully. Show Lily that circumstances don't define worth, that struggle doesn't diminish value, that sometimes the broken, discarded things contain the greatest gifts. I wish I could be there to see what you become, but I'll be watching from wherever consciousness goes after this life ends. Make me proud, Rachel, not with how you spend the money, but with who you choose to be now that survival isn't your only option. You deserve this. Never doubt that. With eternal love, Uncle Theodore. Rachel folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the cabinet. Around her, the studio apartment that had been her prison and refuge sat quiet in the late hour. Tomorrow would bring changes immediate, profound, irreversible. But tonight, she was still Rachel. Survivor, mother, woman who'd refused to be broken by a world designed to keep her down. She thought about the filing cabinet's journey, from worthless inheritance to portal to transformation, from burden to blessing, from overlooked to invaluable, not unlike her own journey. Really, Rachel Monroe had spent 33 years being told she deserved nothing, learning to see herself through others' dismissive eyes, accepting less because she'd been taught to expect nothing more. But Uncle Theodore had seen differently. He'd looked at a struggling single mother and seen treasure, had built an inheritance not just of money, but of validation, of love expressed through careful planning and impossible patience. And now, finally, Rachel could see it too. She deserved this. She deserved security and comfort and breathing room, deserved to give Lily opportunities and education, and a future unlimited by circumstance, deserved to help others climbing the same impossible mountains she'd scaled, deserved to finally rest. In the morning, Rachel would begin the practical work of wealth. But tonight, she stood in her small studio, filing cabinet silent in the corner, and simply breathed. She'd survived. She'd prevailed. And tomorrow, she'd begin to build something beautiful from the treasure everyone else had wanted to discard. The morning after Rachel officially inherited $314 million, she woke to find Lily already dressed, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside the filing cabinet. "Mom," Lily said, her voice carrying that particular seriousness only 5-year-olds could manage. "Are we rich now?" Rachel sat up, rubbing sleep from her eyes. The question deserved honesty. "Yes, baby, we are. Does that mean I can't be friends with Maya anymore?" She said rich kids go to different schools. The innocence of it broke Rachel's heart. She pulled Lily onto the bed, wrapping her arms around her daughter's small frame. "You can be friends with whoever you want. Money doesn't change who we are inside. It just changes what we can do. What are we going to do?" Rachel had spent 11 months thinking about this question. Now, with the answer finally in her power, the weight of it felt both terrifying and exhilarating. "First," she said, "we're going to find a home, a real home, with a yard where you can play. Then we're going to help other people who are struggling like we were. And then we're going to live, really live, without being afraid all the time." 3 months later, Rachel stood in the kitchen of their new house, a modest 3-bedroom in a good school district. Nothing ostentatious, nothing that screamed wealth. Through the window, she could see Lily playing in the backyard with their new dog, a rescue mutt named Treasure, who'd been hours away from euthanasia when Rachel found him at the shelter. The irony of the name wasn't lost on her. Her phone buzzed with a message from Patricia. Foundation paperwork finalized. The Whitmore Monroe Foundation is officially operational. Board meeting next Tuesday. Rachel had spent the past months building something Theodore would have been proud of. The foundation focused on 3 areas: direct financial assistance for single mothers facing eviction, arts education programs in underfunded schools, and scholarships for first-generation college students. The initial endowment was $50 million. It felt simultaneously like an enormous amount and barely a dent in her overall wealth. She'd learned that money, at this scale, operated by different mathematics. The accounts generated more in interest each month than most people earned in a year. But the real transformation wasn't financial. It was in how people treated her now. The diner had thrown her a farewell party when she'd quit, Shanice crying, the regular customers hugging her, everyone pretending they'd always known she'd end up somewhere better. The landlord who'd been evicting her suddenly remembered what a good tenant she'd been. The daycare that had threatened to drop Lily for late payments now offered discounted rates for her loyalty. People who'd looked through her for years suddenly saw her clearly. It made Rachel understand something fundamental about invisibility. Poverty didn't just limit resources, it limited recognition. The world literally couldn't see people without money. Now that she had wealth, she'd become visible, solid, real, worthy of attention. The unfairness of it burned, even as she benefited from it. That's why the Foundation's first major initiative focused on visibility. Rachel funded a campaign highlighting working mothers, their stories, their struggles, their humanity. She hired photographers to document women like she'd been, exhausted, determined, invisible to everyone but their children. The exhibition opened at the city's art museum in September. Rachel stood among the portraits, women in diner uniforms, in hospital scrubs, in cleaning company polo shirts, women who worked multiple jobs and still couldn't make rent, women who sacrificed everything for their children and received nothing but judgment in return. One photograph in particular stopped visitors in their tracks. A mother sleeping in her car, her daughter covered in blankets in the back seat, both of them illuminated by a parking lot security light. The placard beside it read, "This was us. This could be anyone. Poverty isn't failure, it's circumstance. See them, help them. Remember, they're human." A woman approached Rachel during the opening, tears streaming down her face. "I'm living in my car right now," she whispered, "with my 2 boys. I didn't think anyone knew we existed." Rachel pulled out a business card for the Foundation's emergency housing program. "You're not invisible. Not anymore. Call this number tomorrow. We'll help." That night, Rachel returned home to find Lily asleep on the couch, Treasure curled protectively beside her. The house was quiet, warm, safe, everything their studio apartment had never been. She thought about Uncle Theodore, about his 40 years of careful collecting, his methodical conversion of beauty into capital, his trust in her ability to transform resources into purpose. She thought about the filing cabinet, now sitting in her home office, empty of documents but full of meaning, a reminder of where she'd started and how far she'd come. Most of all, she thought about the lesson Theodore had spent his life teaching her. Value existed independent of recognition. Beauty persisted whether or not anyone noticed. Worth was inherent, not assigned. For years, Rachel had been treasure that everyone overlooked. Now she had the resources to ensure other people didn't suffer the same invisibility. Her phone rang. David Keller, calling about the next phase of Foundation development. Rachel answered, already thinking 3 moves ahead. planning programs and initiatives that would outlast her, that would transform lives the way Theodore's careful planning had transformed hers. "I've been thinking," Rachel said, "about expanding the scholarship program. Not just college, but trade schools, certificate programs, anything that creates opportunity." Theodore believed in education as transformation. "I want to honor that." They talked for an hour, mapping out possibilities. When Rachel finally hung up, she stood at the window, looking out at her small yard, her sleeping daughter, her rescued dog. This was wealth's true magic, not the houses or cars or material comfort, though those mattered. The magic was in having the power to say yes. Yes to helping. Yes to changing systems. Yes to making visible what society wanted to ignore. Rachel had spent 33 years being told she deserved nothing. Now she had more than she could ever use. The beautiful irony was that having everything made her understand what truly mattered. Not possession, but purpose. Not accumulation, but distribution. Not being seen, but ensuring others were. Uncle Theodore had left her $312 million, but his real gift was the lesson encoded in every locked drawer, every hidden key, every moment of the 11-month wait. True value revealed itself only to those patient and brave enough to look beyond surface assessments. The filing cabinet everyone wanted to discard had contained a fortune. The single mother everyone dismissed had contained the determination to transform that fortune into something meaningful. Rachel Monroe was no longer invisible. But more importantly, she was using her visibility to illuminate others who remained unseen. And that was treasure worth more than any amount of money could ever be. She walked to Lily's room, tucked her daughter into bed properly, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "You deserve everything, baby. Never let anyone tell you different." In the morning, there would be foundation meetings and investment decisions, and all the complex machinery of wealth management. But tonight, Rachel simply existed in the quiet miracle of security, of comfort, of a future no longer dictated by desperation. Uncle Theodore had believed she was treasure. Now, finally, Rachel believed it too, and she would spend the rest of her life ensuring that every overlooked, dismissed, invisible person understood their own inherent worth, regardless of what the world's locked drawers did or didn't contain. Because the real treasure was never the money. It was the courage to keep searching for the keys. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.